Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Priscilla Iari. I'm the Regional Marketing and Communications Outreach Officer at FACE. FACE is a Federation of African Canadian Economics. So today I'll be wearing two hats. I will be sort of like a moderator just to move the show along. And also later on, I'll come do like a short presentation before the Q&A. Today, FACE has partnered with Betty's Law Office to bring you this webinar tagged Legal Framework for Business Survival, how to secure funding, and then, some growth strategies for your business. We found that a lot of businesses within our community do not have like a strong legal background or knowledge to bring to do like what is acceptable best practice for building a sustainable business. And that is why this session is very important for everyone on the call and even for your friends after, which is why we've also recorded the call. And so that other people who might not be able to make it right now, maybe they're at work, can also listen later on after this event. So I will be doing like a short presentation about FACE, and then I'll invite Mr. Betty as well to make a short presentation about the law firm. And then we'll go into some short speeches about one, understanding business structures and contracts, issuing equity and protecting ownership, business continuity and risk management, funding and financial compliance. Then we'll have real life case studies and Q&A. We have allocated a lot of time for that. So all those burning questions you have and you haven't had the opportunity to ask, this is a good time to ask. Housekeeping would be, please mute your laptops, your phones, whatever it is that you're using to join the call. We expect that we'll pay attention to all that is being said here today. And if you have any questions, if you don't want to forget the questions, please put them in the chat. We will take them when it is time for Q&A. Also, at the time for Q&A, we will also allow you to unmute yourselves to ask direct questions, engage with the panelists, and we will then, provide answers as much as possible. I am not a lawyer, so I'm very glad that we have the subject matter experts here to take those burning questions that you have. However, I'm a financier. I have a degree in finance. I work at FACE. We provide funding for Black entrepreneurs. So I have a lot of information when it comes to funding your business. So I will also be answering questions with regards to funding. So thank you all so much for your time. I will now invite, is it Mr. Betty, to speak about the law firm, the setup, and maybe from your perspective why we're here today. Thank you so much.
Well, really thank you. And I want to thank everyone for taking their time. I know that, time is very valuable. And so just the fact that you're here today says that you have an interest, says that you are an entrepreneur, says that you want to figure out how to, ensure that you're doing things properly. And with Betty's Law Office, we have a strong focus in entrepreneur. Part of it just happens to be in my blood. So though I do have my legal practice, there's also other ventures, and Mahar as well, and Philip as well, two of the other lawyers that we collaborate together. They're also entrepreneurs outside of being lawyers. And so we really truly have an understanding of what it means to be an entrepreneur. And we've been working with businesses for many years. And part of our discussion today, it's going to be very difficult to dive right down to, the minutia of some of the legal things that you are going to need, right? So that's not our goal today. Our goal is to make sure that we give you a broad overview of things that you should be considering. You should be considering if you're starting a business. You should be considering, for example, if you're looking to take on partners. You should be considering if you're going to be contracting outside individuals. And critical, Mahar will speak about, it's always the big one, the tax part of it, right? And what we've discovered is this, conception. Conception is very, very critical. How you start your business, how you set your business up, the things that you do really has an incredible impact on your potential future or success. I've seen so many companies that you would say are successful, and then they run into a challenge and they fall apart because their initial structure was not properly done. It just opens up a whole minefield of challenges. So I'm going to hand it over to Philip. Philip is, it's great to have Philip here. I think I can take a little bit of credit. I helped to train Philip over 20 years ago, and he's just been brilliant working with different communities. And so I'm just going to hand it over to Philip to just lead the initial part of the structures, things that you really do need to think about as a basic. So Phil, just handing it over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Courtney. Thanks, Priscilla. And yes, thanks, Courtney, for all the help over the years. When you're starting out a business, there's sort of three general types you can have: a sole proprietorship, a partnership, or a corporation. It's important, I think, at the start to have proper advice from an accountant on what the tax implications are going to be for each particular structure. Now, in a sole proprietorship, it's just you. It's very simple, very easy to register. You can use your name, or you can your own name, or you can get you can do a name search and register a name. All you really have to worry about is whatever business registrations you need, master business license, that kind of thing. That will have to be renewed every 5 years. But you're very much on your own. You don't get any liability protection. And the same is true from a partnership. A partnership allows you to sort of pool your resources with somebody else, or a number of people, and have an equitable arrangement for sharing profits and liabilities. But it's the corporation that gives you the biggest advantages, where you have a limited liability, that your personal assets are protected. You also have some ability to some flexibility with what you do with your profits, whether you reinvest them in the corporation, declare them as income through a salary or through a dividend, or what have you. There's different tax implications for how you deal with that. So again, it's important to have proper tax advice, but the corporation is where you get the biggest advantages if you're of a sufficient size to warrant the initial investment. You also have the big thing is that the corporation is a separate entity from you, and so you can buy it and you can sell it. You can sell shares. You can issue different types of shares that will stipulate control, whether they're voting shares, non-voting shares. You have a lot of flexibility in how it gets set up.
Phil, before you go on, I'm curious, because a lot of individuals have challenges in understanding that the corporation is a separate entity. And many times people, even though they set up a corporation, they treat it almost as a sole proprietorship. And can you talk a little bit about that, please? Because that's the key element. And you mentioned about protection. One of the elements of the corporation, as you know, is that, an example comes to mind. So I'm going to divert a second. I was representing a new business. It was a hairdressing salon that was opening up on Eglinton Avenue. The owner came to me and put a lot of money into the business. And of course, I suggested, as probably you would, Phil, that he incorporate. And you told him, as you would have, the reasons why he should is primarily legal liability. He says, "Don't worry about that. I'm going to get started. 6 months from now, I'm going to look to set up the corporation." unfortunately, what happened was a customer came in and ended up getting severe burns from the treatment that she received at the salon, and ended up suing his company, and suing him individually, and the business ended up closing. So maybe you can just speak a little bit about that, because I think for many that's a critical piece to understand, that if you're out there operating your business by yourself right now, or if you have a name registration, something goes wrong, there is a possibility that you could end up be the one that is liable. While if you incorporate, then they would actually have to sue the corporation, and your responsibility is limited. So can you just speak a little bit about that? Because I think it's really critical for the group.
Yeah, well, I guess most importantly, your assets. Like if you own a house, car, or whatever, they're protected. So the only thing that a person suing the corporation could go after are the assets of the corporation, which would be, you know, limited to its retained capital and equipment and stuff it owns. Some people set up a corporation. They'll have a holding company that actually owns the operating equipment, and then the operating will lease the equipment from that holding company. So if the operating company gets sued, they don't have those assets, especially if you have a lot of heavy, expensive machinery or what have you that's involved. Same with rather than having a building, owning a building, you lease a building. Even if you're leasing it from yourself through another corporation, you create that distance so that your operation doesn't.
Could actually end up in some relationship or partnership, let's say with a friend. So the friend now comes in, everything's going well, you're all working together, but there's no documentation, there's no shareholders agreement. All of those things are missing. And should things not work out, which is why Phil and I are actually working on this case together, it really becomes a nightmare beyond the greatest proportions, because they've not thought about all of the other elements and things that would be actually put into a shareholders agreement. And your shareholders agreement is really kind of your Bible. This is how the company is going to function. These are the steps we're going to take. This is how we're going to comply, and in those pieces. So on the one hand, if you're purchasing, you've got to look at the other entities. If you're investing, you look at what the shareholder, but also if you're starting, it's also really critical that you ensure that you get a shareholders agreement. Sometimes you may not have done one. For example, if you had gone out and incorporated yourself, right? You may not have put together a full shareholders agreement. But the minute, and it's interesting because we also have another situation which involves matrimonial, husband and wife. And again, they're part of the company, they're directors, but it was never sorted out in terms of in shareholders agreement. And of course, there's also potential tax aspects of it. So Mahar, maybe you can just speak about that at that initial structure, some of the things that you may want to, how that initial structure could actually end up building.
Sure. Thank you for what
all in your hands.
Mr. Hebert
All in
said.
your hands. All in your hands. You've got the basketball there.
Yeah, it's actually Magic Johnson. You like it? Signed it. So we're talking about sometimes going from a sole proprietorship to a corporation. Now we have to always, what I think the panelists have mentioned so much, we got to get the fundamentals and basics correct, because if you don't, it would really hurt you in the long run. For instance, let's pretend you have a sole P for 5, 6 years. You're quite successful now, and you make quite a lot of money. You have good clients, and like, you know what? I want to open a corporation, which is fine. Now the benefits of a corporation is on if you're an active business. That means if it's not a simple holding company, if you're holding residential property, stocks, portfolio, RSP, this is passive assets. When you're sitting there and just collecting rent, that's considered passive assets under the Income Tax Act. But if you're an active business, a pizza store, or whatever you're doing, that's considered active business. On the first $500,000, you're only taxed at 9 to 11%. So it's quite a bit of savings. But let's go back to the scenario of a successful business after 5 years wants to, now I open a corporation. So what you see, 80-90% of the clients that come to us, they've simply continued their accountant or someone else told to open a corporation. If they were ever audited, guess what? They would get a big tax bill by the CRA with penalties and interest on top of it, because you want to roll your assets under Section 85 of the Income Tax Act. It's a tax-free rollover. It's an election that you could get help with. You don't want to simply open a corporation. You have to roll your assets over. And the client said, well, I don't really have any assets. I'm making a lot of money and everything's fine. I don't have any real assets, but you do. Your clients and the goodwill are your biggest assets. So what you have to do is you have to value that, and you file an election and do a rollover. You don't do that, you're going to get nicked. Once 15 years in, CRA, I know they say you don't go past the 3-year mark, their limitation period, but they just have to raise misrep issue and they could go past the 3 years. You're going to get nicked with that. Corporations also have a lot of different types of freedoms. Not only we talk about shielding liability, just quickly touching on that. If you have a sole P, remember, something goes wrong, your house, your car, your watch on your hand, everything's up for grabs. Whereas a corporation, the assets of those corporations are just for grabs in a lawsuit if you happen to lose. And it's very hard to pierce the corporate veil. If you start becoming more successful, what you want to do is you don't want to be the shareholder of that corporation anymore. You want to have a holding company to be the shareholder of that corporation. That's an extra level of asset protection for you. Now, let's talk about that. Let's pretend, I wish I had a diagram for you. I should have had one. We have our corporation. We have 2 business partners, and they're both the shareholders. What happens if one of them's like, I want some money. I want to pull a dividend out. Well, guess what? It matters what tax bracket you're at. Now your dividend is at the highest tax bracket. So your partner is forced to pay a lot of taxes. So a simple structure of setting up a corporation and the 2 shareholders setting up their own holding companies, what happens is if one partner wants to take out a dividend, hey, I don't want to take out that dividend, but we'll both take it out. But it's tax-free dividend to your corporation, and you yourself can choose to take that dividend or not, or to pay that tax or not, right? Hope I could circulate a simple diagram to illustrate that at a later point, but that's some flexibility with corporations also. Now, we sometimes have people come to us, I'm starting a business. I have these people that I want to bring in. What do I do? But we had someone issuing shares all the time. Well, you've lost your company. You've given away most of your company. This person had intellectual property in the company. What you want to do is instead of issuing common shares that maybe grow in value over time, it has to do with negotiation, you issue preferred shares, which are snapshot in time. They don't grow in value. It's just preferred shares on that valuation of that company at that time. Another simple thing I do want to touch on, and Courtney just touched on it, we do a lot of, with Courtney, shareholder disputes, derivative actions in court. A lot of my clients that are in court now simply do not have a shareholder agreement. A lot of people draft shareholder agreements, and a lot of people don't think they need it. Now, let me just 30-second scenario on the downfalls of not having it. Imagine you and I are in a business together. I pass away. You now are in business with the estate and or my spouse, who could be crazy. Did you ever contemplate that? And then what happens if I die? What is the buyout mechanism for that? So the buyout mechanism for that is, hey, we've agreed and we've written a shareholder agreement that I'll pay you the fair market value of your shares. Well, what happens if we're successful and the fair market value of your shares are $5 million? How am I going to pay you out? You know how you're going to pay them out? Simple $200 a month life insurance policy. You So we only draft shareholder agreements with life insurance policies because there's no real exit mechanism. Everyone drafts shareholder agreements, but no one really has an exit mechanism on what happens when you do that. So all these things that we talk about are really important to protect your assets from the very beginning, the fundamentals of how we draft the resolutions, what attributions we give to the shares. Does my partner have voting rights? Can I give them other types of preferred shares? What is this in this agreement we have together that governs our conduct together? So I think all these fundamentals that a lot of lawyers always talk about, unfortunately, today we're doing a good job talking about the downfalls if we don't do it, right? I think that's really important to stick to the basics from the foundation, having a strong foundation in a corporation.
Thanks, man. Phil, in just following up, Mahar, on what you're saying, one of the things that we see, also, Mahar touched on it, is how we undervalue ourselves at the beginning. And he mentioned to you the different elements that you may have that are really our assets. So I can think of one example where we had a construction company that was fairly successful, on the path to be successful. They had an accountant that was going to help them. And I think they gave 35–40% of the company to the accountant right up front. Of course, we had to take steps to take that back because it was just not a logical decision. Because at the end of the day, your shares are your currency. Think of your shares as that's your value. So you may want to use your shares, for example, if you wanted to bring in a partner, you could say, hey, I can't afford to pay you right now, but guess what? I'll issue X amount of shares for you that you have some ownership in the company. So Phil, maybe you could just speak a little bit about that aspect of those initial decisions, because I think many times we see investors that really make bad decisions. Even you get in, it could be a marital situation, and Mahar touched on it. If someone passes away and there's other individuals in the company, how do you deal with that? So all of that has to be put into and codified into a written document. Phil, can you just touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, I'm missing a bit of what you're saying. My connection's cutting out, but I think I got the gist of it. Yeah, it's very important that you make everybody feel comfortable with the shareholder agreement and with any other contracts and policies that are put in place. And you don't want to be acting on the fly and doing things that will dilute the shares for everybody, and then everybody's going to be unhappy. Yeah, you have to uphold the integrity of the business and make sure everybody's on the same page. It's important, from that point, that you have the contracts in place to deal with all the issues that you need to deal with by contract. So you're going to have employment contracts, licensing contracts, commission contracts, NDAs, non-disclosure agreements. Those can be very important. But then you also have,
Bill, because there is this, I would call it, and you just mentioned them, just basic things that every company must have. And Phil, maybe you could just repeat it again, because you need those things. Like if you're going to have a business, you've got to have these elements. Phil, just repeat those again for me.
Yeah, just go over. I've got a list here. So you've got employment contracts, salary commission, bonus structures, independent contractor agreements, non-disclosure agreements, retail contracts for the sale of a product or service, purchase and sale agreements, professional services agreements, fixed price purchase agreements, supplier and distribution agreements, licensing, sales and marketing, loans, loan security, dealership franchise agreements, lease and rental, sharing assets. But in addition to that, you need policies for a lot of things. You need policies set out for, employees, vacations, code of conduct, harassment, remote work, complaints, social media, travel, substance abuse, refunds, service warranties. Yeah, it's important to have all these policies and preferably have them written down and have everybody. It's a good idea to have employees sign a policy acknowledgement form, and this can really protect you if you're sued by an employee or by a customer, and you can show that you followed your company policy. As long as your policy is reasonable, that can give you a great deal of protection.
Mark, maybe you could touch on this a little bit. Individuals have to make a decision, especially when you're starting out. And what we've found is that bringing someone on as an independent contractor may potentially be the best approach to start off. So, Mark, maybe you can just touch on your thoughts on that versus an employee, right? Because you can have the same person, but depending on how you actually bring them on, if you brought them on as an employee, a lot of obligations. If you bring them on as an independent contractor, they have to assume some of those obligations. So, Mara, maybe you can just touch on that a little bit for me.
Thank you, Courtney. So there's several things to consider. Courtney just touched on them. There's so many ways you can skin a cat, as they say, right? It matters the fact scenario of why you're bringing this person on. Are you both friends that have this great idea starting out from the beginning? Or have you on your own created this intellectual property, let's say this software or trademark thing that you want to protect, and you don't necessarily want to give equal amount to this person coming in? And this person coming in, are they giving money or are they giving sweat equity into it? Now, if we take more money, let's say I have 100 common shares, I want to issue the same common shares to someone else. That person puts 500,000 in, we issue more common shares. Well, now the worth of your shares, we met someone who's issued so much common shares, not preferred shares, they've diluted their shares so much, they don't even know their shares are worthless, right? And their paid up capital, which is tax-free, your paid up capital is what you started the corporation with. So if you started a corporation with 500,000, that paid up capital is a tool you use in tax planning because that's always pulled out tax-free. If you have a holding company and you sell, let's say, real estate to your corporation, remember, 50% is now 66.6, but Mark Carney pulled that back to 50%. 50% is taxable, right? Well, what about the 50% that's not taxable? Your accountant, what he does or she is creates, and this is a notional account, it's a fake account, but it's a tracking account, capital dividend account. That capital dividend account keeps building. Your corporation has all this free dividend it can give out to the employees as stock options or anything like that. But what you want to do is if some new person's coming in, it honestly matters how you are, what you have, and the fact scenario. But don't issue so much common shares. If it's your friend, you want to give up some shares, common shares, do it. But there's so many ways we could do this. We could bring them in stock options. We could give them preferred shares. And you want to issue different classes of shares so the dilution doesn't happen.
Just touching on that for a second. What about if you're bringing in someone as an investor versus, let's say, someone, where I'm actually giving you cash to become a part of your company? How does that scenario change things?
Yeah. And again, the facts there, let's do two scenarios. We have one small corporation that is bringing one investor, right? So what I would do for that, and it matters, are they giving sweat equity or not? But what you do for that person is issue preferred shares to that, evaluate your company, say, look, this is worth this much. I give a certificate. Preferred shares are stuck in time. So you could come back to the corporation if it's solvent, give your shares and get that money in time. That doesn't grow in value. That's what you agreed on in time. Now let's do another scenario where I have a company, a young entrepreneur who knows I'm going to raise millions of dollars. So you set up what's called a GPLP structure. And a GP is a general partnership corporation, and your subsidiary is an LP. You don't want to invest in your general partnership. You want the LP to be where the money is raised, and it gives tax-free dividends to the GP. And this protects, let's say, in construction or you're doing software, it protects the general partnership from liabilities while you're raising. So again, sometimes my answers aren't good because there's so many different ways we could do this.
No, really appreciate it. And that's the whole part of it, and is that there are so many different ways. There's no, there's no one set of rule. You have to look at what your actual situation is. If you want to bring an investor in, is this an investor that you want to be a part of your company permanently? Is this an investor that you want to say, hey, I'm going to bring this investor in. We're going to pay you a dividend of X amount. We're going to buy your shares back in 24 months, or we're going to give you an option to acquire the shares. There's so many different scenarios that we have to look at. And I think, the role that we function in, which is an interesting one because we walk the line between legal and business development. So in order to successfully be able to guide you, we've got to completely understand what your business vision is, what your goals are. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Look at all those other structures. Mahar also mentioned, in terms of intellectual property, we at the very beginning, we say to each company, well, you need to trademark. Your trademark actually prevents anyone else from using the logo for your company. So, and your name is an asset. Apple, the name is worth a lot. So it's looking at your intellectual property, those other elements that you're going to be able to bring together. It could be processes. It could be, I'm running a patty shop, but I've figured out instead of, heating the patties at 350 for 15 minutes under my strategy, I'm going to heat them for 30 minutes, et cetera, et cetera. Like there's intellectual property that you might be able to gather in your business that you've got to be aware of. I see that we've got, Mahar, Philip is in court. He had actually stepped out of court, so he'll be back. He's got to step into court. Mahar, was there any other points that you wanted on the taxation side?
There's so many different considerations when you're doing a corporation. You really have to tread carefully. For instance, a good strategy, if you don't have lots of money, is, let's pay some contractors to do some work for us, right? Courtney knows because we work alongside each other on tax litigation. We work close at hand with everything. We just had a successful trial against 6 years in the making against the CRA in regards to contractors, because there was 175 workers at this national firm, and they came and said, 175 contractors were actually employees. You said they were contractors. As the government, I don't think they're contractors. I think they're employees. As such, you should have withheld CPPEI payments. And CPPEI payments are like HST. It's trust money. You should have withheld that. Right away, they seize all your assets. Right away. It's not like corporate tax or personal tax. Trust money, which is HST and CPPI, is a lot more dangerous. So you have to govern your relationship accordingly. Even if you want to say, I want to hire a contract, you really have to seek advice on the contract you make with each other, which is just one of 10 elements the CIR looks at. Because you could have a contract saying we're contractors, we believe we're contractors, but the first element on the Connor Holmes and Court of Appeal, that's just a subjective intent that we show. Now the courts look at the objective reality of whether your relationship is in fact a contractor or not. So we assist clients in terms of formulating that. How do you communicate with each other? Make sure they use their own tools. Make sure you don't control their daily work so much, because if the more control you exercise, the more they become, you become vicariously liable and they're deemed as employees. So then you might be, this is one of the pitfalls. You have this contract, you're going for 10 years, you keep hiring contractors, boom, you get assessed 8 years later for several $million. And you've built this great company only for it to go into shambles. And unfortunately, That's one example, but unfortunately, we see so many examples where at the beginning, this one gentleman said this to me once, and I always use it as an example. At the beginning of the lifetime of a corporation, think about a tennis ball, right? It's only a millimeter goes left, right. It's not a big deal as it's rolling down. But that millimeter, when it goes down miles and miles, as the tennis ball goes down, it turns into miles, right? So that's what we want to avoid. We want to avoid these pitfalls and we want to get it right from the very beginning.
And just following up on that, following the same strategy, you, you've got to conceptualize from the beginning where you want to be, right? So of course you probably have a business plan and you'd say year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, this is where I want to be, and be able to put all of those mechanisms in place from the beginning. Going back and trying to adjust things, especially, for example, if you've issued shares, if you've brought in investors, all of those things. We see situations, and interestingly enough, where someone brings in an investor and they're not able to meet the terms of that they agreed to. Well, guess what happens? Your investor takes over your company, right? So those are again all the things that we would have to look at. Priscilla, I'm good to go. I think I really wanted, just in summary, just to really, I'm going to wrap up how we started.
Mm-hmm.
Conception is the key that for your business, and you need a team. Like in so many situations, we find, when we say to be a sole owner doesn't mean that you have to be the sole person. Success requires a team. You're probably going to need an accountant. You're going to need legal advice. You may need a marketing. You may need other elements. It's very, very difficult for anyone to say, I'm going to build a successful company and I'm going to do it by myself. Once you make that decision that you're going to have a team, many of the issues that we talked about are going to start coming into play. Thank you, Priscilla.
Thank you so much, Mr. Betty. Thank you, Mahar. Thank you, Phil. Thank you for those very valuable information that you've shared. I think just before we go into the Q&A, I wanted to share some insights with regards to some legal considerations when securing loans, grants, or venture capital. And I know that the lawyers have spoken a lot about this as well. I hope, sorry, excuse me. I hope we're all listening to that. But I know that from time to time, as entrepreneurs, we need some kind of funding for our business. And it is important to read the terms and conditions, the terms of those loans or whatever funding it is that you are getting into. So last week, I was invited at the Steel Brampton to speak about business funding, and one of our clients was there as well to speak. And he was sharing his experience before he was able to get a face loan, and it was that he was so desperate for funds that he got to some credit union somewhere, and he was charged 50% interest, 50% interest, and I mean, they didn't realize that on time until sort of like when it was time to pay, right? And I know that as small businesses, sometimes we feel like, oh, I don't need a lawyer to review this contract. I can just skim through myself. Honestly, like Mr. Betty just mentioned, you need a team. So even at the point where you are still a sole proprietor, before you become a corporation, you need a team. You need a lawyer, you need an accountant. And not one reason why some entrepreneurs don't get the funding that they need, for example, is they heap a lot of expenses under their revenue just because they're trying to pay less taxes. However, there's a way to do it, and accountants know how to do it. By the time you do it by yourself and you think you're playing a smart one, when it's time to get funding, there isn't any paper trail to show that your business has a heft to receive this money you're applying for. So it is important, if you don't have the expertise yourself, it is important to seek advice from people who do. So those terms and conditions are very important. Get a lawyer. You don't have to get like the biggest law firms. You can reach out to Betty's law firm. They have a lot of expertise, a lot of professionals within their team to support you um if that's what you need. There's so many accountants as well. If you need any kind of support, reach out to Face. We have various partners that we can connect you with to get all of these things sorted. But it is very important that you take that element of your business very seriously. I know that sometimes you think this is just a small business. I'm just only making $10,000 dollars in revenue right now. But we need to start to think bigger. So you're making 10,000 today. What is the potential of that $10,000 business tomorrow? We need to start to think bigger. And in thinking bigger, we need to create that baseline, that context, a strong foundation for the business. So thank you so much, sirs, for your time, for sharing that information. Please, if you have questions, you can raise your hand, let me know, and you can ask questions directly. I see some people already are asking questions in the chat. So we just want to create some time, ample time for questions. So I will, invite people. I see your hand. If you raise your hands, I'll see you and invite you. But I'll also read some questions from the chat. Okay. Okay, Mr. Betts, let me read this.
There are some individual issues in the chat in terms of, I guess, legal elements that others may be dealing with. It'd be very
Mhm.
difficult to speak about those
Yeah, yeah.
on the webinar itself. But we'll put our info out for anyone that has a specific situation that they're actually dealing with right now.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that. Okay. So, but the first question I had was someone asked, is this information applicable for businesses operated throughout Canada, including Quebec?
It is, yeah. What we really try to do is to give you, considerations, and I'm sure many of you, I hope we weren't too repetitive because I know, you've started your business, you may be doing, but absolutely, the foundational concepts that we talked about would be right throughout Canada.
Okay. Okay. So I'll invite Whitney now to ask your question.
Hello, thank you all for your time. Very informative. I have actually two questions. The first one would be, why would someone choose to incorporate provincially versus federally? Like in my context, I'm looking to acquire a laundromat facility, a self-service laundromat facility. And so I'm just wondering at what stage, I know you guys talked about the benefits, or no, did you? Well, anyways, I've heard of the benefits of going provincially versus federally, and just trying to figure out like who is this really relevant for? So why would I? Because I'm based in Quebec, so why would I?
If you think your company is going to be doing business federally, that's probably a good indication that you may want to consider that. You still will probably have to do a provincial registration for each province that you're going to be doing business in. So in your particular situation, I think you mentioned a laundromat.
Yeah, a laundromat facility, self-service.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if it's in a provincial in a particular province, I would just probably look at doing that provincial registration if that's your goal. But if you intend to go national, then at least you'll have the federal corporation in place.
Okay. Thank you. And my second question, so Phil talked about the various documents to have in place. I'm just wondering if those documents should be, so in my case, if I'm starting off as a sole proprietor, would I still need to have those documents in place in the event that I do choose to expand? Or is it
Sorry,
more,
which documents would that be?
you listed, Phil listed a whole bunch of documents, like policy documents that he was.
I think what Phil listed was not just the company operational, sorry, not just the legal requirements relating to incorporation, but also just basic things that I think he highlighted that you should have within your organization to protect yourself.
Okay, even as a sole proprietor.
Absolutely. Because if you're doing any kind of business, if you're purchasing any product, if you're, the thing about liability is, and I know we may be, trying to, push the negatives, but that's part of our job. We've got to think of possibly everything that could go wrong and then
Okay.
try and build those up front. So absolutely. Doesn't matter whether you're incorporated or a sole proprietorship, there's still certain basic things that you're going to need to have in place.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Whitney. Atta, I think your question is very personal, and like Mr. Betty said, you'll be able to reach out to them directly after the call. Mohammed, I see Mahar is already responding to your questions. Jonathan is saying, I would love to connect with someone who could help me copyright and trademark my IPs. Again, the information for the law office will be shared after the call. Somebody is raising Esso. I see your hand.
Yeah. Thanks for this. I'm just a little bit late to the party, but my question, I don't know if this has been addressed. I actually have an incorporated company, but I want to see how it's registered for a particular business. But I'm wondering, like, can I make that a holding company? Because there are other things that are actually different from what is registered for. So I don't know if that was addressed, or how do I start a holding?
I'm going to hand that over to Mahar, and he'll take a shot
So
at it.
can you repeat the question? You've already incorporated the company. You have a specific reason, like listed the company as X, Y, and Z, but now you're doing something else.
I wanted to add something to it. Yeah, the different business.
What do you mean? You have a corporation, you're running a certain business, but now out of the same corporation, you kind of want to run another business. How do you do that?
Exactly. That's right.
I wouldn't do that, sir, because what you're doing is if you have one business, whether successful or not, right? Now I'm going to run another business out of it. If something goes wrong in either business, if lawsuit happens, they have the right to all your assets and businesses for both businesses. So you want to spend that little bit of money to incorporate a new business.
Oh.
You don't want to commingle your businesses at all. That's the message you want to give today.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mahar, for that question, for that answer. Somebody says, having a trademark issued by someone else for my company or logo, does it entitle them to my own company? This is a question from Mohammed.
Yeah, I know he's going to take a shot, but yeah, potentially.
Yeah.
Yeah, there may be an issue. I dealt with a case regarding Caravana, where Caravana had not registered their trademark and someone else did. And technically, yes, the other person would own the trademark, which makes things difficult. But Mahar, what are your thoughts?
Exactly what there's definitely potential issues. That trademark obviously is different than patent. The good thing in our country, there's common law elements, right? Sometimes we see if your trademark, you've used that name and you could show in court for a very long time, and you could show that you've utilized that even though you didn't file it, but you have a brand and you'll be highly prejudiced, the common law element may kick in. Again, we don't know all the facts of the case, so don't take this as official legal advice, but it may kick in and you might win, even though they filed after. But again, it's very fact specific. Like Courtney says, a lot of times that won't fly, but sometimes it will, depending on the case.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that response. I see Jonathan's hand is up. Jonathan?
Yes, thank you. I was just curious what kind of checklist someone would have to go through if they wanted to start a holding company.
We could present that. If you drop your email, we'll send one out to you. So you'll have a checklist there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. I also wanted to tell everyone, I know so many people got to know about this webinar from various sources. So whatever source it is that you got to know this webinar from, you can send a message. If you are not getting all the emails, send a message or send an email so that you can get all the resources, the recording for this webinar, all the email addresses for the lawyers, face, everything you need. Just reach out to whoever it was that sent you the information about this webinar. Okay. So there's a question here. It says, "Hi, I have a question regarding a franchise business. If a franchise contract was terminated by the franchise owner in June of 2024, but the landlord refuses." Okay, I think Maha already responded to that. Okay, somebody says, "Maha, can you please clarify if a business has multiple services we offer, can they all be housed under one corporation, or only when we have different businesses, we should spin up another corporation?"
I think that's Priscilla. He had answered that to try and,
Okay.
because our approach is always just each individual corporation becomes, a shelter for you, right? And so you try not to commingle too many things under that one shelter, when literally you can spend the potential consequences are so grave that to set up another company, it's more than worth it. Just to have peace of mind that if something goes wrong, you can, the company goes into bankruptcy or something negative happens, then it doesn't impact on the other businesses that you have.
Okay. Another question here is it possible to change the properties of a business, especially early before doing too much business? I don't understand the question. Tosin Bamike, could you please come off mute and ask the question? I'm not sure I understand the question. Are you on the call? Okay. So I'm not sure I understand this question, so I don't know if we can answer. But is it possible to change properties of a business?
Yeah.
Okay, please.
Hi.
Hi. Please ask the
Yeah.
question.
Yeah. Like, assuming it's registered for maybe like general transportation or something, or like logistics, and now it's that is registered for did not come up, and then maybe you decided to change the business, maybe do something else like farming, yeah, something like that. If you can change the property without changing the name and without having to register a new corporation.
Okay, I get that. Mahar, did you get that?
Yeah, Courtney, do you want me to answer that? I don't
Yeah,
want to jump
that'd be
in
great.
before.
Thanks.
So generally speaking, remember what we said earlier, there's a couple of things we want to consider when we're doing that. We do a lot of international tax planning for high net worth clients. We do Canadian cross-border, this, that. What I tell my clients is this. Sometimes we do business sometimes there's people have corporations just laying around. They're like, you know what? I have this old corporation I want to use. But you know your business best. Sometimes there's skeletons in the closet. There's creditors that have been chasing you that you don't even know about. It's possible you don't have this problem. It's possible you don't have any problem, right? And you know your business best. But what I always consider is, what is the level of risk versus the nominal fee you pay to set up a new corporation, right? Is the creditors going to come out of the woodworks for that transportation company that you didn't pay the shipping, let's say like that. Let's say there's no issue and you just say, you know what, there's no issue. I just want to change the property or the name. What you do is you file amendments to the articles of incorporation and you do it that way.
Thank you so much, Mahar. When do you know when it's time to create a trust?
That's a very unique question. I know Mahar does a lot of trust work. It's a complex area. He's very good at it, but he's going to give us a 30-second response because he just knows he's an expert on trust. So Mahar, it's a very, as I said, a very technical, unique area. Mahar, do you want to give it a shot?
Yeah, I'll give it a shot. I'll try to keep it under 1 minute, Courtney. So I'll just give you a brief rundown of trust, okay? Trust law goes back all the way to the medieval times. It's very important legal thing in our civil society and all the common law world. How it started was medieval knights used to go off to fight. A lot of them knew they weren't coming back, so they would entrust their assets with someone, and that's how trust law developed. Courts are very reluctant to attack or break a trust. We only see that happen pretty much in net family proceeds when husband and wife are breaking up, and then the courts, one of the husband or the wife has exerted so much control over the trust. That's when a court interferes. Why I said all that is trusts are amazing tools for if you've built significant assets to protect your assets. What we do is we give the ownership of your corporation to the trust. So your corporation, you don't own the company. You're not a shareholder. The trust is. So when a lawsuit happens, guess what? No one's getting sued because there is no one to sue. So it's for asset protection. In terms of if you have a business and you've grown it in such a value, you minimize taxes because we all have $1.25 million in active business. So if I sell or if I die, all my assets are deemed disposed of that day. A trust does an automatic transfer, so there's no deemed disposition under tax law. And then you can multiply your lifetime 1.2 million saving. So let's say I sell a business and I have to pay 5 million in capital gains. Well, I have, if I've structured the company correctly, 1.25 million. My wife has 1.25 million. My children, I have now zero. From paying $5 million of taxes, I now pay $0 because I've multiplied my lifetime capital gains exemptions. The third reason why a trust is good, and what's the obvious reason, is succession planning. If we pass away, and it's very hard for everyone to grasp. Let's say I have a restaurant. I pass away. The CRA comes in and says the date of death, your restaurant is sold that day. My client's like, what do you mean? It's not going to be sold. I have employees. But the CRA deems it sold, deems all your property sold, all your shares of your corporation sold. That day you owe taxes to His Majesty the Queen, whether you like it or not. A trust alleviates all that. On death, there's an automatic transfer and there's no deemed disposition on your capital assets. So a trust is very valuable for a multitude of things. It's a very good tool to use. When you use trust, it matters, have you built significant assets? Even if you haven't built super significant assets, it's when you start doing succession planning. And I would start that early on. Even if you're relatively young, you have a successful corporation, we would freeze the value of the shares of your corporation by doing a Section 85 or 86 exchange from your common shares to preferred shares. All your future growth, if you go from $5 to $20 million, guess what? On death, that growth is tax-free to your children and your spouse and stuff like that under our tax code. So I could keep talking about trust for another 2 hours. They're such useful tools, but these are the ways we use trust.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much for that, Mahar. Somebody says, just to confirm what the presenters are saying, we are in year 3 of a co-founder departure. We thought it would have taken 3 to 6 months at the outset. I think this is referring to something the presenters mentioned earlier. Thank you for sharing your perspective on that. There are a lot of IP financial support offered by government. Do you know of any legal funds we can access for support?
You may be able to actually drop us an email because we do know of a program that that one of our clients successfully used. Don't know if the funding is still there for them, but they were able to get the funding to support registration, intellectual property, etc. So yeah, there is one. If you drop us an email, we can take a look and see if that fund is still active. It's a fund actually coming out of Quebec.
Okay, thank you so much for that. So the emails are in the chat. You can, send an email to Mr. Betty or to me. Our email addresses are in the chat. I think his is betty@bettyslaw.com. Mine is priscilla@facecoalition.com. So if you have all those things that you need, all those questions, all the questions that you have or resources that you need, please send us an email. We will direct you to the right parties. This question says, does your law firm offer flat rate services to make it more affordable for us?
We actually do, and that's one of the things that we've done is together we've come up with packages to get you started, ongoing management, business development, I love the business development piece. I like to create business opportunities and bring people together. So yeah, we do have packages that includes all three of them. And before I forget, I mean, the other element that um, we should keep in mind is many of us are diverse businesses, right? And there are policies. For example, someone contacted me yesterday. Let's say the World Cup is coming to Toronto, and they're looking for in their bids now. You can Google it yourself on many different pieces for supplies to those games. And so they have allocation for diverse businesses. So those are things as well to kind of bear in mind as you're looking at business development. It doesn't matter what area you're in. There may be, whether federal government or provincial or even the city of Toronto, contracts that you might be eligible for. But again, you're not going to be able to get those contracts unless you have all the proper structuring and paperwork done beforehand.
Okay. Thank you so much for sharing that. Another question here says, can you please clarify that just because you have a corporation does not completely insulate a person, especially if they do nefarious things like theft, fraud, etc.?
Mahar, did you want to take that?
Sure. No, of course not. Nothing shields you from anything. If you're doing anything in Latin, what they call malfeasance, you're acting badly, you're liable. I'll talk about some basic liabilities of trust. Generally speaking, shareholders are the owner of trust. They pass a resolution. Directors are running the day-to-day. Directors have the real power. They don't necessarily have to be the shareholder, and they elect officers. The director has the most amount of liability because he's day-to-day, but they're all protected. Now, if you act really with malfeasance or go above and beyond acting nefariously, you can show in litigation and what they call piercing the corporate veil. Go behind the veil of the corporation to get that person, right? There's also other liabilities. If you don't pay CRA, you happen to wind up a corporation. Guess who's liable? The director's liable for that, even though he may not be the owner of that. So for sure, there's not ultimate asset protection in regards to that. If you're acting nefariously, someone can bring, even the shareholders can bring under Section 248 oppressive application that you've oppressed their shareholder rights individually, or bring a derivative action on behalf of the corporation that you've acted badly. So no, just because you have a corporation does not mean you can do whatever you want.
Thank you so much, Mahar, for that. I'll quickly take the other question. Somebody says, I just set up a not-for-profit and would like to include trustees. I do not know them that well. They are in the same profession. What advice do you have with regards to protecting the organization?
I think similarly there, probably if the individual could just drop us an email, and then we'll address that specific, because again, it's so many different that's going to be depend on what exactly their unique situation.
Thank you so much. So the trust is deemed responsible for paying out dividends, salary, shares on behalf of the corporation. This is a question from Mahar based on the trust conversation earlier.
It matters. Like what Courtney just said, no, there's all different types of trust. If you set up the way we set it up, sometimes the scenario I said where the trust owns the common shares of the trust, it's just the owner of the corporation. The day-to-day operations does not change. We don't want that to change necessarily. Now, if you want to pay, let's say through your CDA account or anything like that, you want to try to be creative with paying non-taxable stuff, you might run the payment through your beneficiaries. But generally speaking, we would have, other than the beneficiaries of you, yourself, and the children, we would set up an corporation to be another beneficiary alongside your corporation, because we want all the passive assets, real estate in there, to be invested through that investment company who's a beneficiary of the trust. But if you're paying employee salaries and stuff like that. We don't want to mess with the day-to-day operations of the corporation at all. So we don't do that type of trust structure, although they do exist. For instance, those types of structures, they hold actual assets. They hold bank accounts. Or you set up a Barbados trust, which we do, or Cayman Islands, which we do. When we set it up, no assets ever leave the corporation or the country. We simply give the common shares to the trust because we don't think all that's necessary.
The great thing about a trust is, Mara said, you set it up for the specific purpose that you'd like to. And that could be 1,000 different reasons why you're going to do that.
Thank you. The final question I have here says, a follow-up to that trust question, is there a minimum income in requirement in order to set up a trust?
There's not, no. There's no minimum requirement. So, trust, I just want to add, and I know it's a final question, setting up a trust is not just for business, okay? You as an individual, if you have children, you may want to consider looking at whether or not putting your assets in a trust may end up being a benefit for you if something was to happen to you. So there's many different uses of on the trust. And the cleaners requirements would advise on debt payment. Again, Jacqueline, you probably would have to drop me an email on that so that we could get the specifics.
Yes. Thank you, everyone. Do we have any final questions before we go? We have, read out the questions in the Q&A box and then in the chat. If we do not have any other questions, do we have any questions for Mahar? Any comments, final comments from Mahar and Mr. Betty before we wrap up?
Just want to thank you and really thank everyone. I know it's, again, time is very valuable for being here. And it's just, we really want you to succeed. But success requires proper conception, just like being born, right? You've got to go through those growing pains and having the support persons around you. It's very difficult to give birth by yourself, so, just kind of keep that analogy in mind. I know I keep repeating it, but how what happens at that critical moment will determine, many things moving forward. So really appreciate it and thank you. Mahar?
Thank you all. Thank you for the opportunity. We work closely, I think, Courtney and I, for the past 15 years. And Courtney is really big in his community and everything he's done. So reach out. He's always there to help everyone. And we're here to help you guys. Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
all.
you,
Thank you
everyone.
so much. I see a lot of thank yous in the chat.
Yeah.
Thank you all for
And we
coming.
appreciate it. As you
Yes.
can tell, this is what we're passionate about because that's what we do. Have a great day, everyone.
Absolutely. So send an email to info@bettyslaw.com to set up an appointment or to any of the emails that we've shared earlier, or send me an email and we will take it from there. Thank you all so much for your time.
Really appreciate it.
See you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
All
Bye-bye.
right, everyone. Take care. Bye.